The mind of man can joyfully sing in creative celebration, capable of heroic epics and grand oratories. But untutored, its output will consist primarily of fault-finding, gossip, self-pity, and never-ending expressions of despair over man's condition and future. The surveying of external events by those of unsettled internal states will always produce pictures of turmoil and threat. Pleasures in non-physical areas come not from events, but from states, and thus the joys in a change of consciousness come only by change in consciousness. In the mind's naive condition, it is much turned to matters of decay and destruction, and those who continue to accept and entertain the incomplete negative view of life are little given to joyous song, and with little energy with which to undertake their own creative compositions. It is natural for the tortoise to feel the physical weight of his shell and be aware of the slowness of his step. But what of all this is to bar his mind from soaring with the eagles? One man began his remarks thusly: "As regards what I am about to say, while I am not absolutely certain as to the exact degree of its historical significance," and life suddenly interrupted and asked, "Is this something you're going to put in words?" And the man replied, "Well, of course." And I said, "Well, no need for your uncertainty as to its importance. Whatever it is bullshit." And as he sulked away, under his breath he muttered, "Thanks a lot, life." And life chirped back, "Hey, what's life for?" One of the ever-pressing dangers of critical and hostile emotions is that they are always in the service of redundancy and never point a person's attention to anything new. Until you can escape this permanently, you might consider a worthy temporary attitude to be this: the best way to feel about others is not to feel any way in particular about them. Non-physical survival is not dependent on imaginary superiority to others. What new has been learned by the mind of an ant by its treating of a termite with scorn? One man says, "I do not want to face the fact that everything man has thought, written, and said can be permanently blown away in an instant by a hurricane, a volcanic eruption, or any other direct confrontation with reality. No, sir, this I shall not face." And he didn't. Since the common collective life of man is lived in a dream, to play what you find an acceptable part therein, you must partake at least in part of a dream. This is the only way the damn thing will work. Says one man, "I figure that within me I must have about 17 demons, and not one too many, and not one too few. For without them, I don't know what I'd do." You figure he might know something? The ordinary consider that they're being entertained when immersed in activities that promote the running and rambling of their mind, such as movies, video games, popular music, and literature, while totally the opposite being the case with serious mystics. The somnambulism of expectoration. If you spit on others, you'll spit on you. The ill-founded basis for self-accusation that from otherwise directed derives. On no planet in this galaxy does there exist an emotional sword with but one edge. The threat to the alert, however, is not in danger that they may do to others asleep, but by neglect to themselves. A man asked a mystic, "What is there in man that he can use to remind himself?" And the mystic replied, What do you think there is? One man says, I don't really like to think about it a lot, but other than the material objects it's responsible for, the products of the human mind consist of nothing more than impotent, fragile fairy tales, with no meaning or significance other than that which men in concert attribute to them. A man asked a mystic, can believing that Istanbul is farther from Paris than it actually is interfere with a man's travel there too? And the mystic replied, I'm afraid that interfere with doesn't begin to cover it. Ultimately make improbable is more like it. The distances between certain areas of man's nervous system have yet to be properly assessed. The bridge across the chasm twixt the present and the future is rarely noted, since man is the span upon which he stands. For some years did one man feel overwhelmed by the spatial aspects of life, then later felt grossly confused by the temporal. He ultimately began to suspect that the basis of such problems lay in another area entirely, somewhere perhaps having to do with the nature of such feelings as impotency and uncertainty. One man says that it took him 20 years to stop being dragged along after whatever thoughts passed through him, and then another 20 to do so regarding emotions. He says that based on the nearly unbelievable pleasure and freedom resulting therefrom, that he can hardly wait to see what the next 20 will bring. On man's routine mental battlefield, the power of mystical ideas is not determined by their dominance over other ideas, for they engage in no such attempted persuasive combat, but rather transcend and move beyond it in an internal place wherein there is no mental opposition to how things are. No man more conscious has ever vocally condemned, and no one more conscious will internally accept same based on any common conception. Just as life holds no snail guilty for not flying, neither does the man properly hold himself responsible for abilities which he has not discovered on his own, apart from any, no matter how similar, championed by the collective. One way to tell if your feelings of self-accusation are mechanical and meaningless, or based on transcendental possibilities, is that when it is the latter, it never occurs to you to tell anyone about it. The hallmark of useless guilt is that it always requires two people to carry it. If you do not realize that life itself is alive, you will attempt to attribute to man his successes and lay at his feet his failures, neither of which can be satisfyingly done. Among the many travelers who initially depart Paris was one man who said that he had to continually remind himself that there were two separate aspects of his undertaking. There is first the bright, more alive city of Istanbul itself, and secondly, the attempted journey thereto. And he said it had proved most difficult to keep this distinction in mind, especially at times when he was temporarily off the train. An alert traveler will keep by his seat a private alarm clock and secret pictures of the illustrious invisible destination. Observing his son busily at work at his writing desk, a father said to him, "It is possible to make words make sense, and it is possible to make ideas make sense. But it is in the realm of the mystical that the two possibilities in perfect balance meet." One man dreamed of dying and returning as a lion, another of dying and coming back as an eagle, and a third chap dreamed of dying then turning back up as a real man. The ordinary take as proof of their individual interest in change the collective's expressions of determination to make things better. The collective think in terms of events, while only the matter of states offers any possibility to the individual. In one myth, the devil was created by God to help keep him awake. By the way, what's your devil? One guy thought to himself, I wonder if to have a new kind of awareness is to be in a place where nothing can get to you but you. Some say that men know more and more about less and less, and some say that men know more and more about more and more. And periodically someone will even say that men know less and less about more and more. But the one thing you never hear anyone say is that they know less and less about less and less. And you know why? Because the more conscious don't go around bragging. That's why. One man says he's finally realized that 2 trains run by, or even through, his house continually. One's whistle seems to call him in words of sorts, while the other's noise seems to extend some sort of emotional invitation to ride. He goes on to say that he's now aware that on those days he is most distressed, the 2 mighty mechanical beasts roar past, or through, him simultaneously. He concludes by noting that he never expected that being a mystic would have so much to do with a proper understanding of timing. One man's sometimes reaction to the sound of everyday human conversation. I see the dead are talking again with their mouth open. Legend says there was one mystical school which described man's normal state of consciousness, commonly referred to as sleep, as being the noise made by disordered energy. A man asked a mystic, what is there in man that he can use to motivate himself? And the mystic replied, what do you think there is? It takes 2 hands to drown the human spirit and potential. 2 things are required for a man to be in the grip of a noxious feeling: the feeling and thinking that goes along with it. In the non-physical realm, there is no such creature as pristine, aggressive emotion. 2 hands are always necessary to submerge man in the futility of negativity. A man asked a mystic, what is there in man that he can control? And the mystic replied, what do you think there is? Men go to doctors, priests, and astrologers for treatments, but only to the mystical for a cure. Passengers on a train with no destination have no desire for the journey to end. What a sad journey that must be, with no knowledge of where it began and no understanding of where it can go. Yet, all along the track stand mystics, their ears secretly cupped in their hands, listening for that certain silence, that stillness that explains it all. A conversation with some individuals happened to arise recently, the apparent subject of which some of you may find of interest. And on a wider scale, I was going to strongly suggest that all of you should find of greater interest, but of less specific grounding It has to do with the same sorts of things that are included in tonight's Just Read items, having to do with the possible and the impossible, having to do with the world, the two worlds in which men live, the world of events and the world of states. By the way, those two worlds, since I mentioned it, of events and states, are also known in some quarters as the world of the impossible and the world of the possible. And the subject also tonight of a very general nature, but the feeling of self-accusation and how it is tied to, if it is functional, how it would be tied to a man's understanding of what's possible and what's not possible. And at least one other area. That once a man knows what the journey is about, from where, from what source can he bring about two needed companions? That once he has some idea, then he realizes the need for a reminding agent and a motivating factor. Now back to the subject about which a recent private conversation arose. The subject itself seemed to be, or started off to be, this. There was some additional preface, but it came to the point that apparently a solid, historical, publicly known example seemed to be pregnant and begging for use, and it was so used. That being in the apparent world of religion, in Christianity. Here we have a large segment of the world's population taking it to be filled with ideas worthy of a man's note, ideas worthy of a man's devotion, worthy of a man's active pursuit if he but knew how. The religion, as all the world's great religions are, based upon an apparent prophetic single figure, some either Superman or demi-Superman, in this case, of course, being Jesus. But by one of the accounts, taken as canonical, taken as divine, revealed, holy history, by one of the accounts, there it is that Jesus is being crucified. And at the crudest level, of course, this ultimately being interpreted after he supposedly arises as being the triumph over physical death. But even amongst the ordinary out in life, it periodically, someone periodically gives it a passing shot, a passing attempt to use the death, if not really metaphorically, at least symbolically, to also include the attempted, or the idea of a triumph over the deadness of the normal human spirit, or a kind of regeneration or redemption over the sin that has already been laid out many books and thousands of years ago inside of Christianity. The apparent original sin executed by man, and that then this death, if not literally a triumph over physical demise, then his crucifixion was to represent a redemption, a rebirth from this initial sin, this shortcoming. But on top of all that, here we have a large part of the world's population pursue this, and that by most of their accounts, would be the crowning achievement, the focal point, the climax of the testaments, of the gospel, the life of Jesus. The basis of Christianity was his crucifixion and his triumphal return from the dead, or his overcoming of death, whether it be literal or figurative. But just before that, there's one account, publicly known, been repeated, made it through all the versions, made it even through the hands of King James and his flunkies. And that is, in one of the accounts, the last words that Jesus said, there he is dying for some reason, literal or figurative. Let's take it at the first, just a simple version that most people would accept it to begin with. That one of his final words, transposed in English, or his final words were either God or Father, why have thou forsaken me? Now I'm going to press on a little bit. As I said, some of you may find, I was suggesting that you would find what appears to be the subject itself of some interest. But sooner or later I would have picked out some example that, when just happened, is why I'm now repeating it to all of you, that is as good an example as any to bring up another wider question. People are always interested, always have been, that have some notion of another state of consciousness or some apparent possible change in their internal states. That is, if they, for whatever reason, say that they are absolutely convinced, they hear about it, or they find someone they think knows, and they say, well, you don't have to convince me, I'm not here to be won over, I am already convinced of the validity of it, the possibility of it, that it's true, it happens. My question to you is, they would present to someone, is what will motivate me to do it? How can I remind myself to be looking for it? Where can I start with any real information about it? I'm convinced it's there. I'm convinced it's somewhere, that it's always been here. How can I undertake it? What can I do that will nourish me, possibly on a daily basis? I keep talking about it in roundabout ways, but this should bring, as I said, it's a beautiful example. You don't have to have any interest in Christianity. It's not required that you be pro or con. It's just to be aware of the fact that a large segment of the world's population say that their life is centered around Christianity, the life of Jesus and what it represents, what it promises, the possibilities it holds for a man's change, for his rebirth, whatever they call it. So just take that into consideration, and then ask yourself, here's the wider area, also tied to people wondering, well, what can I find to use of interest in life? What can I find of value in life? The way I've been normally referring to it is the fact that the edges of the secret are just right in front of everyone constantly, which you can take, if you didn't, you can take in the beginning as being a attempted poetic, metaphorical flowering of my speech, and say, well, that's pretty subtle, but there are blatant, almost obnoxious examples of life doing this, and not one person, well, the mass of humanity, not only never benefits from it, they never even attempt to benefit from it, because any sort of potentially beneficial inquiry never even arises. In this case, it's right there in anyone's Bible that the founder of the religion, a man that's now considered unanalyzed in most cases, but by most Christians, or for many years, is considered synonymous with God himself, the Creator. But here it is, this man, this Superman, being crucified. It's about to be the beginning of the end, which would be the beginning of the end of his earthly missions, which would be the beginning of the revelation of a new day, the promise of a eternal life, the promise of a new life, a new possibility for all of mankind. So all the slow build-up, as all of you know as well as many of us, built up to him dragging the cross and everything involved, and ends up there on this hill. the skies beginning to cry, lightning flashes, the earth trembles. And after being there for whatever the biblical account is, 9 hours instead of 9 days, in case you'd like to compare what he was up to compared to Odin. Of course, then you fall into things like, give me those good old gods of, a long time ago, because they knew how to do it right. Anyway, no offense, you got to admit it's enough for a man for 9 hours to be nailed up on a cross and stuck and spat at and gouged. But at any rate, by one of the accounts, his final words were, either God or Father, why have thou forsaken me? Now, person, if you're interested in learning, if you're interested in the fact, the whole idea that there's some sort of secret knowledge or there's a secret activity going on in life, and I have the audacity to hint, and in fact almost state outright that it's not all that hidden, it's just right there, and no one avails themselves of the information that is right there. Again, you can say, well, that sounds pretty vague, and you're just, here's a specific, something affecting a large segment of the world's population. You should ask yourself, that's a very crude way of putting it, but it'd take me 20 minutes to try and make it less crude, and it still would not have much of an advantage. But let's just take it, that it should strike one. Here's a prime example. The following. That life in some way wanted something resembling Christianity to be part of the collective makeup of man. There it is. But what is going on? Well, let me make it even simpler. That there it is, that Christianity is now a big, quote, business, a big part of life's operation, a big part of the human experience. What in the world are the Christians thinking about, those with some vested interest in it? Those with any interest, but especially the vested interest, those making a living off of it, those that their life is built around the promotion of Christianity, assuming that Jesus said that. What in the world are they thinking about for somebody to have reported that? What in God's name could they be thinking about? Is that sufficient dramatics? Truly, consider it. Just assume he said it. You know, I mean, if a man lived 30 years, he said all kinds of things. But that above all, his final words that on the surface, I'm positive people have tried to, those in Christianity, ordinary minds have tried to otherwise analyze it, otherwise interpret it, other than how it at first sounds to any reasonable, literate ear. If you say, that's what he said, they go, well, here's the original. Anyway, how they tried to trace it, they've gone through several translations, and you take your best shot, but it still comes out something like, what went wrong? Why did you guys let me down? But in the case, the way it's actually translated into the King James Version, that is something I'm more or less right on the money, but it's like, it's either God, they can't seem to decide, or Father, but I'll use either one. Why hast thou forsaken me? That there, about to die, his final words, and it sounds as though, wait a minute, something went awry, I devoted my life to this thing, and now here at the final moment, it's almost as though he's crying out, you let me down. Where are you? Where is the higher power? Where is God, as they would want to call it? It would be, from an ordinary view, if you were a would-be Christian, it is certainly depressing and discouraging enough if he said that. That's one thing. But I repeat, I know you hope I don't hurt my voice with my cheap theatrics, but then you should be asking, what in the world? What in the world is going on that the Christians look right there before it went to the printer the first time, and there it was that Luke or whoever it was reported that, and they went, oh, okay. They were like, and everybody, 4 or 5 people had to proofread it, surely. And they all looked at it, and they saw those words and let it go into print. You should ask yourself, what in God's name are they up to? Why? No one would do that. No one. Think about it. No, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Masons, the Audubon Society would not put out their official canon, the official text of what they're up to, and somewhere along the line say that the father of the Illuminati or John Jacob Audubon or whoever it was, that he along the way somewhere said, "Goddamn birds drive me crazy," you know. Or the official handbook of the Republican Party would not say something like, you know, our greatest mistake was when we, you know, picked out the likes of Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan. Or, you know. It just seems absolutely, you think, well, wait a minute, whoever came up with the idea of doing that had to be anti whoever it was. They had to be part of some sort of fifth column work. Either that or the whole group of them are engaged in some great drive to self-destruction. Yet no such thing has happened. It's still there in the Bible. No one's ever gone back. The church has never gone back and go, you know what, we just realized there's a serious error. It's still there. All right, that's the one wide area that I was going to point to. It is that sort of thing going on continually. Now you've got to do that, which the ordinary mind, even though I can describe it, and ordinary minds could listen and go, yeah, I could do that, but they never do it. They never even go this far. That is, remember that you're taking an attitude, I'm assuming I'm talking to a mind that is not pro-Christianity or not Christianity. You're just looking at, it's just an example. But it's an example that's it's such a good example because it is so widely, it is such a widespread part of such a large number of people on this planet. That there it is, right at the heart of this operation, this belief system, this series of ideas. That right there at the right at the climax of it all, the apparent source of the ideas, or if you're really good, it looked like as though the idea itself turned on itself and went, uh-oh, you know, I could be wrong. That right at the very end, right when it should be, which they do finally take it as being the moment of triumph. It is the foyer to the moment of glory, that his death was actually the beginning of the triumph, because only by dying could he come back. Only by dying could he redeem humanity and save humanity. And so there it is. The death is just a split second. It is just the first step, the brief moment before the ultimate triumph. And what does he do at that moment? Wherein the band's about to play, the riser's going to bring up Christianity, the lights are going to flash, it's going to be the moment of glory, and right before it happens, the father of it, the author of it goes, oh my God, the whole thing's gone awry. By the way, might be a passing interest to you, the world of religions, known and unknown, and all the worlds of smaller would-be mystical cults you just might find of interest are also, there's not an exception to where some great figure, if not the founder of it, somewhere along the way said something very similar. And they seem to love to put it in these figures' mouth on their deathbed. That just as they die, some great guru goes, well, and he looks around. It's just a shame to leave you people like this. And which again on the surface, you should ask yourself, well, if it's some group of people that they're now making a living off, it's turned into a cult, it's turned into a mystical cult of some kind, even if he said that, what in the hell are they thinking about to keep repeating it? And they say it like, well, he said it and then just died, and they all kind of smile like, you know, isn't that cute? Or you think, well, if you're an outsider and you're just thinking, what in the world would possess you to repeat that? The wider range, the wider range I was trying to get you to see is the kind of information out there in life all the time. Is you look at that, and by any reasonable objective, that is outside a pro or con camp of Christianity, that you were just observing it, and you found out that this happened, and that they continue to report it, and you were a reasonable, sane, objective observer of it, your question would be, what in the world is possessing them to repeat that? Why did they include that? Then, anytime you can begin that, you are not only opening up what appears to be the subject, what you're actually doing is opening your mind, but apparently you're opening the subject then to, I'll just call them an infinite, it's not, but you open it to additional. They just immediately revealing, immediately unfolding additional questions that you had never considered. And I am now beginning, when I'm talking about these questions, I'm talking about ideas that have some useful potential. It is not mere noises of the mind, because noises of the mind would either be a rejection or acceptance of Christianity. It'd be just an automatic pro or con. But you should, the first question I was presenting, that this outside observer, this objective observer should be asking, is what in the world possesses them to do that? They're holding a knife to their own throat. They're already, to me, I can't understand why they haven't drawn serious blood. But why in the world would they do that? Then that immediately opens up the next question. That this observer, say, he would look around and go, now you said that they've been repeating that for 2,000 years, and you say that 1/4 of humanity swears by this and says it is their guiding light. And you go, yeah. Then the next question, if you knew all that already, is what in the world possessed them to do it? Then another question immediately comes up as to why does it not seem to have any effect? Why is it not that, so to speak, let's assume that's somewhere toward the end of the New Testament, wherever it is, that somebody gets involved with Christianity and they like all the story and they join up and buy the right robes and candles and do whatever it takes to be a Christian until they get to the part that says that just as he died, he says, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? When they get to that part, the church no longer forbids the reading of the Holy Script, so sooner or later we'll assume that any semi-intelligent Christian would finally read the words of the founder, and they'd finally get to the point. One of the versions that the founder said, just as he was dying, my God, why have thou forsaken me? And once they did that, how are they holding on to any adherence? Why doesn't everyone run from it like it was a madhouse? Nobody does. I could bring out 2 or 3 refinements of that question, but let me go ahead and jump to this is the kind of question that for the last some months I keep encouraging you in a certain way to look, is that there's information in life that at first, if you're an ordinary mind, there's all sorts of information that you can take as ironic, you can take as self-contradictory in the way the mind normally, if you're not an adherent, if you're not a follower, in this case of Christianity, then you look upon it as foolishness. You look upon it as proof that you're correct in not being Christian. You look at it as evidence beyond any possible refutation that the people do not know what they're doing, that's a fraud. But all of that requires that you not see the fact that it continues to succeed, it continues to flourish. The bigger question, at least for the time being so I can move on, is for a person, when you begin to see the kinds of things that go on in life and they're just obvious, they're out there, and if you can think with what amounts to something beyond the binary level so that you don't get involved, so that you don't become sarcastic, you're not hostile about it, you're not critical, you don't look at it and say what idiots Christians are, that's not the point. That's not going to help. Criticism never helps is the problem, because all it does is serve the purpose of repetition. It serves the status quo. And it doesn't matter whether you are for or against something. To look upon Christianity, to look upon politics, to look upon the Masons, to look upon the Dixons, to look upon any subject and be critical of it does one thing absolutely, one thing and one thing only. From an alert person's attitude, position, once they see it, it does one thing for sure. It bars you from anything new. Because criticism is never new. It never opens up any, it never reveals any piece of new information. Never, never, never. And you would think that once people see that, if they could remember it, that would be enough to stop, not just overt vocal criticism, but of internally resisting and arguing with and having your own aggressive, hostile emotions toward things go on in life and your hostile thoughts toward it, if for no other reason. It may not be that they're worthy of any real attention, but if you're hostile toward it, if you're critical of it, there's one thing for sure, that's the end of it for you. because it will never reveal anything else. So you have to get past. That's why I thought this would be a good example. Get past of hearing that the founder of a religion in his dying words went, "God, why have thou forsaken me?" And you think, what in the world are they thinking about? If he said that, why would they keep repeating it? And then jump from that, then immediately you realize, wait a minute. Even though they do it, it doesn't seem to have any adverse effect. Things just roll right along. Then, here was the wider question, finally. Rhetorical. A name a question. Just the realization that everything going on in life is going on to another extent. That no matter what you see going on in life, no matter what men say is going on in life, it's not that they're wrong, but that's not even the beginning of what's going on. And if for no other reason, examples such as this, if a man had the ability to do something actually resembling think, that is, not simply parrot some pro or con, not simply repeat something. One of the views already held by the collective of humanity, which is no view at all, it's just the passing of mechanical energy through the nervous system. But if you had the ability to think at all, that should stop a man right there. Those kind of examples. To realize here is something that is absolutely illogical, insane. By any reasonable observation of it, it's inexplicable. How could a group of people, not just a small group of crackpots, but how could a large segment of humanity be supporters, in some cases to the death, of ideas expressed by a man whose dying words, by their account, not by a critic's account, by their account, his dying words were, to God, since his religion, why have thou forsaken me? That alone, there could have been some other field with that, it's just a great example. That alone should make anyone with any possibility of doing anything resembling thinking, think, you know, there's a lot more going on in life than you normally think there is. And you do not have to go to Tibet or to Patagonia or to the Ukraine to find it. It's not a matter of looking for it and searching it out. You're covered in it. Everywhere you look, there it is. The inner part I was going to get to of the subject itself has to do with states and events. We certainly don't have time for a lot more of it tonight, but this will be going on for a few more nights. There are several ways to take, let's go back and take as fact that a guy named Jesus existed and that he was more conscious and that there he was dying voluntarily, that he could have escaped it. That old, you got to remember all the stories of a heroic death of some real hero, someone deserving of memory, all the way from Socrates to many others and then to Jesus, was that in all cases they could have escaped. And so you have to call it a voluntary crucifixion, a voluntary execution, because they could have escaped by all the reports, which is another story we've touched on before, but that all the good stories, all the real heroic myths, in case you wanted a definition, because I know there are all kinds of stories, from comic books and superheroes, but the ones that are based, the ones that are really heroic, have one thing among others in common, and that is that the death of the hero was voluntary. He could have gotten out of it. All Socrates had to do was nod his head. Okay. All Jesus had to go was, no, I didn't say that. Or will you stop doing that? And all had to go was, okay. Just tell me you will. You don't have to mean it. Just say you will out here in public. And you go, okay, I will. And that'd been the end of it. What does it represent for someone? We'll jump real quick into the kind of area that you know I'm referring to. That Jesus is not a piece of God, and it doesn't even matter whether anybody exactly named that, because it is an archetypical story. It is a part of the human nervous system, It is in the world of states within a man, not the world of events. Whether it happened or not is moot. And sooner or later, you're going to realize that on yourself, because people, I can say, which I do, that you cannot change the world of events. That's been pointed out many, many ways for thousands of years. And you can say that to ordinary, decent, sane people, and someone will say, well, that's not true. They'll say, you can change the world of events. They can say, all right, there's a woman that I just heard down the street who her house burned down, or her husband died in a wreck, and her and her children are starving. I'm going down there as soon as I leave here, and I am taking her money and clothes. I can change events. I can change the circumstances, the dire straits in which she finds herself. I can have an effect on the world of events. Here's the thing. If you're presented with the idea that you cannot change the world of events, and your mind says that you can, and can come up with an example just like I did, you should do it. And that's the end of it. Anyone who understands is not going out, of course, publicly and insist in some proselytizing attempt to convince ordinary men that you cannot change the world of events. It's either something you understand or something you don't. And again, at the edge of all good mystical ideas, I can stand here and refute them from an ordinary view. That's why I do it so often. Is I can state as damn near an absolute fact as can be stated verbally, and that is that a man lives in two worlds of events and states, and there's only one over which he can have any control, and that is the world of states. But I can speak right up. I know how it goes. It's the way it's supposed to go. A nice, ordinary, sane person who may have been listening to me up to now and went, well, that's not true. Do you mean that literally? And I say, yes. And not just me, they could hear it somewhere else, you understand. And they can say immediately, that is not so. A man can affect events, as you're calling them, and come up with an immediate example. I can stop and help an old lady across the street. I can stop and give a hungry person food. If the mind says that, that is what that person should do. And there's nothing else to be said. Do you understand? But there is the joy of it. There is the beauty of mystical ideas, because they do not survive. Their power is not derived on some mental battlefield over the fact that they triumph, that they are superior to other ideas. I know even you end up having to talk about a different possibility in some way. You have to compare it to what's here, and I'll say things, even I, say higher state or expanded state about as often, but I'll say things about higher state. It has to sound in some way as though it is, unless you're going to make yourself sound ridiculous, just literally, is you have to make it sound as though it's in some way better. That is actually misnamed because, or misdirected, because it is not better unless you understand that it's better, personally. Which is another way of me pointing out that if it is said that you can have no effect over the world of events, and your mind says, yes, you can, then it's wrong. That is what the first part. If your mind says, yes, it can, and come up with an example, your mind should pursue that. That's what you should be doing. That is the beauty of mystical ideas. They do not triumph. Their power is not based upon them triumphing and conquering some other ideas. It is not a battle, because other ideas, for ordinary people, will always triumph. They're supposed to. But we'll have to operate for the last few minutes on the basis. You either understand or you don't. As I said, I can't prove it, and I'm not about to even try. But there is only one place over which a man can exercise any individual control. Also, I can't resist, the last part I was just talking about how ordinary minds will say and prove, just show up the folly of the statement that you cannot affect the world of events, when a mind will say, I'm sorry, that's not true, because I can stop right now and find a hungry person on the street and feed them. I changed events. I can see two children fighting or two men fighting and try to make peace, try to get them to shake hands, I can affect events. This normally is hidden to most people. They certainly don't analyze it in this way, but most individuals take as proof of their desire to change their ability to exercise some control over life, they take it as being the collective's continual expression of their determination to make things better. Listen quick, we're running out. It's sort of like this. It's part of the nature of civilization and the collectivization of man. Is a person, an ordinary person, feels good. Let's say they're just sitting home and listening to the news, and the president comes out, and it ain't necessarily the president. That helps. That's part of the purpose of talking leadership. It's one of the advantages that we have of having a president, if you want to look at it that way, than wolves have over a leader, because all the leader can do is bark and bite your ass and keep people in line. When it gets to a verbal level of wolf packs, apparently the leader can offer some encouragement. It's moot, it's always ill-directed, but it seems to. But I was going to say, you could be seeing, watching the news, and the way that men take as evidence of their own desire to change, their own commitment, once they think about it, to change and to grow, is, let us say that the news item is about how much crime had increased in a certain neighborhood in a certain city, and had gone so bad that old people wouldn't leave their house, that teenagers were just grabbing their pockets, just a horrible, and drive-by shootings and dope dealings and all that. But then they interview, here's some woman decided she had had enough, her son got shot or whatever it was, and they all get together and meet, and they start a neighborhood program to increase awareness in school of social responsibilities and how we should all get along and all this. And it shows it started off only one woman on this lonely crusade against all the forces of evil, and now they show them they're meeting now in some little church or in her apartment, and there's gone in a month's time or 6 months' time from her to it's now 200 decent men and women there in the neighborhood, and they interview them. I'm not around, you know how it goes, but it's sort of the final word that the reporter, that kind of story, says, well, things have certainly changed, and all of you here together, and they all nod, and the woman who started, she says, well, it just shows. There's one thing about it. No matter what happens, we are committed now. We have taken back our neighborhoods from the forces of evil and of violence, and there is no turning back now. We are on the right road to recover. We are now taking back our neighborhoods and making the world safe for our children. This goes on, continuing, not just the news I just brought up to date. It's stuck in parables and everywhere else, but you'll hear it tonight on the news. If you listen to enough news programs, there'll be that kind of story. And again, if you can look at it from outside, having no feeling whatsoever that you're just trying, that if you were capable of actually thinking as a cold-blooded observer, and you looked at that and you understood everything involved in the nature of it and the history of it and how it's tied in, the people involved, including the reporter, including you sitting home listening to it, and to whatever degree, if you're an ordinary person, and momentarily feel good, almost want to holler out, yeah, good for you people. You know, by God, that's true. You are taking mechanical, non-understood expressions of the collective. And the collective always, at the civilized level, that's what I was going to say is part of the purpose of political leaders, not only religious leaders, but political, is to speak encouraging words, at least periodically, but to express determination that we shall make things better. And if you're an ordinary person, you're not supposed to resist it. And I'm not making fun when I say that you'll sit there if you're just an ordinary person. And it can, you know, almost bring a warmth to your heart and a little beginning of a tear to your eye that, by God, you know, even when things are down, when humanity seems like it's just seriously running amok, there'll always be people somewhere. They'll kind of pull themselves together and brush off the mud and the muck of regression and violence and hostility and hatred, and they'll get together and work for the common weal, the common good. And the individual, though, takes that as a kind of proof. He never analyzes it, but it satisfies him. It is no nourishment. It's simply words in his ears. It is illusionary food from a more mystical viewpoint, from a practical viewpoint. But he takes it as nourishment, that I am in favor of change. And he does it simply by anything as nebulous, as far removed as sitting there looking at a TV set, letting electrons bounce across a cathode ray tube, sound waves coming out of a little speaker into his ears, and this group of people saying, yes, We're now on the right road to recovery. We've taken back our neighborhoods, and things are going to get nothing but better from here on. And he feels, he feels kind of good. On what basis? It has no practical significance, and rather than it being, you understand, I'm talking about two different things. That's the way things are supposed to be. No one wants to interfere. That's the way things are. If you had a vote, you should be in favor of that. Now, we're not ridiculing it, but it is like jejune nourishment. It is empty calories for an individual because it substitutes. By you hearing that and going, oh, good. I'm stretching it, but it keeps a man with enough empty calories in his soul, in his potential soul, that will keep him from making effort individually. Because collectively, the people are not getting together to make things better. There's only one person can make things better for you, and that's you. There is no such thing as collective help. It is part of the dream of the power of events as opposed to states, and even though I didn't get around to it when we were running out, I was also, I'll do it next time, point out what it would represent of a Jesus saying, my God or Father, why have thou forsaken me? The first thing is, it would represent a man's awareness that he continually fails to do that which he knows he can do, that he continues to take long periods of naps when he knows how to snap out of it. That represents one. The other would represent, at a lesser level, a man blaming the world of events on his inner state. Because that's one interpretation, is there it is, a man cursing, saying, God, why has thou forsaken me? What he's saying is the events are killing me. I'm laying here bleeding, I'm nailed up, I'm about to die, and the events did it to me, and, that ain't fair. It's hurting. Not physically hurting. That's not what the prayer or the cry, oh God, why has thou forsaken me? He doesn't say I'm hurting like hell. He's saying, why have thou forsaken me? He is crying for somewhere from within that his inner state has been harmed, that he's on the verge of being destroyed, that his inner state, what he's achieved, sounds as though he's about to give it up. Not just give up the physical life, but he's about to give it up by saying, what happened? But what that represents from another translation, and nothing to do with literal death, is a man is now falling back, taking a serious nap, and he is now blaming the world of events for his condition rather than where it belongs. There's more to it than that, but is that all the tape?